Well, welcome back to the cottage farmstead. If we haven't met before, I'm Rebecca. So the day that I'm filming is a Saturday, which for us is a meal prep day. So I've already put together some chocolate protein muffins that are going to be our breakfast for the next few days. And then I'll also put together a pot of chicken pot pie soup that is going to be our lunches for the weekdays this coming week. With this pot pie soup though, I needed 2 cups of heavy cream to stir into the soup. And when I was at the grocery store, they only had the quart size of the heavy cream in stock that day. So I have 2 extra cups of cream. And one of our favorite ways to use up extra cream is to make ice cream. So a little over a decade ago, I got really lucky at Kohl's of all places. I always like taking a peek at the clearance rack that they often have in the back just to see what's there. And they happen to have this small 1.5 quart ice cream maker for 90% off. It was an open box, so it didn't have the manual or anything, but look at that. I still can't believe I bought this for $8 at Kohl's. But it has served us very well. 1.5 quart is plenty of ice cream for 2 people. And it's also the perfect amount if you're having a few people over and you want some ice cream to top brownies or have along with some pie. So this size is super convenient. We really like the fact that the churning bucket doesn't require any rock salt or ice. It is all self-contained. It's actually in the freezer right now. I'll be pulling it out in a minute. And so you just pour it into the churning bucket, turn it on, and 20 minutes later you have ice cream. So it took me a while to find a good recipe to fit inside of my 1.5 quart churn. A lot of the recipes out there at the time were for the big ice cream churns that you would pull out for, say, the 4th of July. Or they have the smaller batches were usually no churn recipes, but I wanted one that I could churn. So I finally found one that was the right size, super simple ingredients, and over the years we have modified it to our own tastes. I don't remember where the original recipe for this one came from, but we have modified it a little bit over the years. The original recipe called for agave or honey. We found that we liked agave, but honey had a bit too strong of a flavor, at least the raw organic honeys that we were using from local beekeepers. It almost tasted too much like honey rather than vanilla ice cream, which depending on what dish you're serving may be a good or bad thing. We also found when we were out of agave a couple times that if you just put regular old cane sugar in this recipe, it turns out just fine as well. So it's very flexible on what sweetener you have on hand. You could probably put maple syrup in here if you wanted to serve it, say, with like apple pie or something like that. So you can adapt it to however you would like. But the basic recipe is a cup of whole milk, 2 cups cream, 2 tablespoons vanilla, a pinch of salt, and then a 1/2 cup of your sweetener. One of the variations that I really like is to swap out the cup of whole milk for a cup of plain whole fat yogurt. I really enjoy the tangier flavor that it gives. It's almost like a cheesecake ice cream flavor, and it's really good when you're serving it on a really rich dessert that helps cut the sweetness with the tang of the frozen yogurt in it. Another thing that we really love about this recipe is there's no egg involved, so I don't have to cook something over the stove and then let it chill before I can make the ice cream. I can just dump all this in a bowl, pour it in the churn, and it's ready to go. Today I am going to be making the yogurt variation. I have a little bit of yogurt left in one of my jars that I want to use up before it goes bad, so I will be using that as well as a little bit of a new batch of yogurt that we have in the fridge. So let's get churning. So this recipe is essentially dump and go. I know I have exactly 2 cups of cream left in this container as I put 2 cups in my soup. So I'm just gonna pour all of that into my bowl here. And then it calls for a cup of milk or a cup of yogurt. You could do 1/2 and 1/2 as well. So get my jars of yogurt here. You can use store-bought yogurt. This happens to be homemade yogurt. It's a little bit more on the watery side, so it's a little bit more of a milk consistency, but you could use Greek yogurt. It doesn't particularly matter in this recipe. If you're interested in making your own homemade yogurt, I will link below to how we make our homemade yogurt here, as it's super simple. We make it directly in the mason jars about once a month, and it is a great thing to have in the fridge for a quick snack or second breakfast. I don't have any agave syrup on hand today, so I'm just gonna be using plain old sugar. If you wanted your sugar to totally dissolve before you start churning, you can set this in the fridge for an hour or two and allow the sugar to dissolve in there and give it a stir. We have found that doesn't affect the texture so much for us to just go ahead and churn it right away, but personal preference. The next up is the vanilla. I think the original recipe called for 1 tablespoon. Farmer Nathan and I like a stronger vanilla, so we do 2 tablespoons. So you can change that however you like in your recipe. And it calls for a pinch of salt. Toss that in there. So I can usually tell from the change in tone of the ice cream maker that the ice cream is getting nice and thick in there, and that is the case with this one. You can see how thick it is. As you can see, a lot of it gets stuck to the paddle, so I like putting that into a 9x5 loaf pan, which is just about the perfect size for this amount of ice cream. You could serve your ice cream at this consistency. It would be like soft serve. If you want your ice cream a little bit more firm, you can put it in the freezer for a couple hours and it'll be more like traditional ice cream. Since Farmer Nathan is not here yet to partake of this with me, I'm gonna be putting it into the freezer. So I will be scraping it off with the paddle here into my loaf pan, as well as getting it out of the churn itself. I like to cover it with plastic wrap or aluminum foil, something to mostly seal it off so that it doesn't absorb the flavors of the freezer. I'm gonna pop this in the freezer. Farmer Nathan will be back in a couple hours, so we'll have this with our lunch today. Well, we very quickly went from a 0% chance of rain today to a thunderstorm. I had noticed that it was getting gradually darker and darker for the last 30 minutes or so, but it suddenly thundered and it started raining just now, as well as the wind picked up. And while I usually prefer filming in natural light, I did have to turn on the overhead light in here as it got a little too dark in the kitchen to continue cooking. So the churn usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes in order to get to ice cream that I can serve at a soft serve consistency. So I usually like to use that time to either clean up the kitchen a little bit or to make some sort of topping to go on top of the ice cream. Today I'm gonna make 2 different toppings as they are both super simple to make side by side on the stove. So the first one I'm gonna make is what we call a chocolate ganache sauce. I don't have a particular recipe for it. It's just a mixture of chocolate chips, butter, and either cream or milk depending on what I have on hand. And it makes a pretty basic ganache, but when you pour it onto the ice cream, it freezes over and behaves a bit like the magic shell that you can buy at the grocery store, or like the dipped cones that you get at Dairy Queen. So that's usually a very fun one to drizzle on top of ice cream. And the second topping I'm gonna make is a caramel sauce. I like this particular recipe as it's stores in a more liquid form, which makes it easier to drizzle on top of ice cream, desserts, or even be stirred into coffee. There's usually plenty of the caramel left over, as caramel's not my favorite topping. So we put it in the refrigerator for a couple weeks, and Farmer Nathan can stir it into his coffee for a nice treat. So for the chocolate ganache sauce, I eyeball about a tablespoon of butter, a tablespoon of milk or cream, and then I put in my chocolate chips, and I'm eyeballing, it's a little less than the cup, maybe 3/4 of a cup of chocolate chips. A few extra for good measure. And then I'm gonna put it on low or one above low, depending on how fast I want it to melt for me. And I'll just keep an eye on this and stir it as it melts. And I'm gonna move on to the caramel sauce and get that going. So for the caramel sauce, I'm gonna be making a half recipe today as I don't need a ton of this on hand. So I'm gonna do a 1/4 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of brown sugar, 1/8 cup of milk, and a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. And with this one, it just needs to be brought to a boil and then boil for about 2 minutes, and then you remove it from the heat. So like I said, these are super simple to be doing simultaneously on the stove while the churn is running. And you can have 2 delicious homemade sauces very quickly. So my caramel sauce is up to a boil, so I'm going to just start my timer here and stir it while it boils. And then my chocolate sauce was a little bit thick, so I added a splash more milk, and now we're at a pretty good texture that I can scoop onto my ice cream. So I'm going to turn this one off. All right, my timer went off. Turn that off there. And stir it until the bubbles subside a little bit here so I don't burn it. And there is our homemade caramel sauce. Well, I hope this video inspired you to try making homemade ice cream in your own kitchen. And I hope it showed you how quick and easy it is to make your own homemade ice cream and your toppings like caramel sauce and hot fudge sauce. With just basic pantry staples that you probably already have on hand, you can whip up a delicious dessert for your dinner tonight. And with that, I'll catch you next time.